So the TATE program, why should companies take the TATE service from PTSD resolution?
Well, a lot of companies in the UK employ people who've been in the armed forces, and that's a very good thing. They can be extremely good employees. They tend to be structured, organised, loyal, and very hardworking. That's a marvellous thing in an employee. However, anybody who's been in the armed forces and has been into operations does run the risk of having acquired bits of history which can come back and bite them later on. And it's always possible that while in your service as an employee, somebody who's been in the forces may start to develop some post-traumatic symptoms. Now, they won't immediately tell you about that. There's a strong chance they won't tell anybody about it, but they will start to become less efficient, less focused, maybe won't be sleeping so well, they may make worse decisions, and in time that could become a problem for the company. So it makes sense for organisations that employ people who've been in the forces to understand how those processes work, to understand how trauma works, and to know what to do about people who are just beginning to express post-traumatic symptoms, so that you can get to them, do something useful with them, persuade them to get some help before it becomes a problem to the point where they might no longer be able to remain in your employment.
And what happens in a TATE training session?
There are two parts to the trauma awareness training for employers program. The first one is simply the awareness. We think employers all need to know what trauma is, how it works, how it might manifest itself, and what it's going to do to the thought processes and behaviour of people who've been affected by post-traumatic symptoms. So that's the first part. How to be in a position to understand when trauma is happening and to know that you've got a deadline looming. You're going to have to do something with that employee before very long, before it becomes a frank problem. The second part is, what do you actually do next? Now, one of the difficulties that you have if you have post-traumatic symptoms is that you tend to withdraw from social contact. A lot of people find it very hard to talk about the experiences that they've been through or the symptoms that they're experiencing, even to people who are very close to them, and are very unlikely to talk about it to work colleagues or to managers, because one of the things they're going to want to do above all else is to keep the job. They may be aware that they're becoming vulnerable, that they might lose their job, and they're not going to put their hand up and volunteer that they've got a difficulty. So as a manager or as a human resources person in a company that employs ex-services people, or come to that anybody who might have been in traumatic situations, it's really useful to know how to hold a conversation with somebody who doesn't necessarily want to talk. Not to go in there and force the truth out of them, but to know how to open up a conversation, how to build rapport with people so that you can get the information that might lead to a jointly formed decision that it's time to do something about it and get some help so that the person can stay in useful employment.
Excellent. Thank you.